Okay, this is another war that the United States started. It is the War of 1812. All right, fought between June 18th of 1812 uh, for almost 3 years, February 18th of 1815. All right. So once again, before we start, we're going to take a quick look at the nature of history. All right. We said it's like a court trial where you have two sides, and each side gets to present its evidence and state its case. So history is like a court trial. You present your evidence and state your case. To manufacture false evidence is a crime, and just as well to hide or conceal evidence is also a crime because in both cases you create a false perception, which is the essence of a lie. Right? So can history lie? All right, and we'll start by what is history. Some people believe that history is the way it was, and you can't change the way it was. Right? Uh, yeah, that is so far from the truth. All right, or is history the way people say it was? All right, this is more of what's really going on. All right, so that we talked about different sources of history, academic, popular history channel, commercial stuff, news, media, and Hollywood movies. Right. So we said the quality of this is best up here. As you go down, it turns to crap. Right. Hollywood history is such garbage, by and large, for the most part. However, the impact goes up as you go down, right? I mean, most people don't remember much of anything from what they learned in school, history classes, right? It's like, what? A lot of people I've talked to barely remember taking the course or don't remember. Um, so the most impactful is Hollywood. The worst history is the most impactful. Creates the biggest impression because it's entertaining. It has emotions and drama. Captivates people. All right, all right. So what do I want to say? Typical history on the War of 1812 is crap history. I believe my analysis blows away the popular history, and I've done. I'm going to fully admit this right up front. I've done no real research. Right? I've just used my background knowledge and integrated a far broader and realistic picture. I could do the research, but I really just don't have any interest in this war. Uh, yeah, it'll be hard for me to do it with. I just don't care. Um, but please hear me out, all right? Bear with me, and I'll show you what I mean by the end. Right now, I included this war, even though I don't know much. I haven't done the research, right? Because it is a war that we obviously started. Now, I don't have to do research for that. This is obvious, and this is undeniable. We started this war. All right. All right, so here's the introduction. Thus far, I taught you three examples of how the U.S. started wars. Right, the Iraq Invasion War. I don't know if you remember that. The Vietnam War in the Gulf of Tonkin. Pearl Harbor attack in World War II, and this will be the fourth one. Right, we'll do a bunch more. Um, Now, the last example, Pearl Harbor, is an example of lying history. How you can distort, conceal, you know, play lawyer lie games with facts, right? To create a distorted picture of history. Now, the next war I'll cover, or this war, the War of 1812, is more an example of just poor history, written by people who cannot figure out what's going on, right? Don't see what's going on. So here's a note. I'll be examining the next U.S. wars in this order because it depicts well the expansion of the United States. So we're going to go War of 1812, Mexican-American War, Civil War, Indian War, Spanish-American War, World War I. Each of these were an element of U.S. expansion. Um, Now, I did the initial wars this way because they're chronologically in reverse order, the most recent, going back, right? And I did that because they're more recent, people may relate to it more, have a little better knowledge of it, right? So this is more to catch your attention with the most recent wars. Now we're going back because this shows better the expansion of the United States, which is a big part of U.S. history. Uh, Now, at the very outset, I want to openly admit that I'm not an expert on the War of 1812. I've done no original research into primary source documents. I've only read about 5 or 6 short histories of the war, and general sources like U.S. history texts, Western history texts, or online sources like Britannica, Wikipedia, and so forth. Right? Right. But this is the only war I have not researched intensively. Right? So don't think, oh, he doesn't know squat about all these wars. All right, I'm admitting this war I don't, but this is the only one. Right? And like I said, I just don't have the interest to put forth the effort. All right. However, with only my background knowledge, completely off the top of my head, I immediately see far more into the causes of the War of 1812 than these sources do. Right? Uh, Typically, these sources state 2 or 3, like 3 main reasons, right, why the U.S. started the war. And without question, the United States initiated this war with this declaration of war on Great Britain on June 18th of 1812. That is a simple, straightforward truth. It cannot be denied. Right? I know people are going to want to, typically see things the way they want to see things, and but that you cannot deny that. So the 3 reasons for the U.S. starting the war stated in these sources are: 1, British impressment of American merchant ship sailors into the British Royal Navy; 2, the 1807 British Order of Council, which obstructed U.S. trade with continental Europe; 3, British supply of weapons to American Indians in the Great Lakes region, preventing American settlement of the Northwest Territory. All right, so the brown area here is the Northwest Territory. That was ceded by Great Britain to the United States in the Treaty of Paris, which concluded our Revolutionary War. All right, so they said, okay, you guys can have that. But now they're arming the Indians in there, preventing us from taking them. Right? I mean, that's Indian land, that's their home. They're going to defend it. So assessment of these motives. We're going to go through each one by one. Right? So here's the first, here's the second, here's the third. All right. So first motive for fight is British were boarding American merchant ships and impressing some sailors into service in the British Royal Navy. Right? Like, you're invading American, that's American territory in a sense. Got an American flag flying over it, as they do, right? But Britain claimed that they were British deserters, right? Now, Britain did in fact have a long problem of Navy deserters, going back to like the 16 somethings, right? When they became really a commercial and naval power on the seas. Now, in the 18th century, 1700s, right, the Royal Navy suffered a 25% desertion rate, right, which means, that's high. If that happened in the U.S. Navy, that'd be crazy. That means 1 out of every 4 deserted. All right. Now, in 1803, 10 years into the French Revolution, Napoleonic Wars, Admiral Nelson reported to the British Royal Navy that over 42,000 deserters, left the British, ran away in the 10 years since 1793. Right. Now, many of these British deserters were fleeing to America to evade forced conscription into naval service for various reasons. One is it was forced. They were impressed. This impressment here, right, happened in England. Right? They took these guys, and they need them in the Navy. They threw them in. So they didn't like being there to begin with, right? British naval service was harsh in terms of discipline methods, physically demanding, poor diet, and living conditions. A lot of people suffered from lack of proper nutrition, scurvy, whatever. Plus, you can say they had questionable patriotism. Especially the further you get away from the southern, England areas, right? Not just Ireland, but further north, Scotland. back then. Um, okay. Uh, so Britain had, they also had anti-immigration laws, right? That you can't leave the country. And this was part of their mercantilist policy, right? To get an economic advantage against other nations. They said that they wanted to maintain their labor force within the country. You can't leave our country, right? Especially if you had a skill. Right? If you're like a skilled weaver or a skilled craftsman of some sort, you're not leaving the country. You're not going to another country to compete against us. Right? All right, so now I'm not sure if all the sailors impressed by the British were actually deserters, right? I mean, it could be that they took people wrongly, and knowing the British, I don't know, that could be likely. And I don't know what methods they used to determine nationality, right? But I read that there were at least 3 cases, right? That were they took guys who were born in the United States, right? Born in America. They impressed them, right? I'm not sure how widespread that was. Um, it's possible that some British deserters had gained American naturalization, so they were deserters, but they're also American citizens at this point. If so, I'm not sure how British and American law would conflict. But in any event, both Jefferson, who was president in 1801 to 1809, and Madison, who was president during this war, right? Both of them refused to issue papers of naturalization. Uh, right, so that was on us, right? If they took these guys and they say they're naturalized, well, you can't prove it because there were no papers issued. All right, Britain had been impressing these sailors since 1793, when the French Revolutionary Napoleonic War started. They weren't even Napoleonic after Napoleon came to power about 1800 or 1801 or whatever he did, right? So that's 19 years. They've been doing this for 19 years. So after 19 years of doing it, why all of a sudden is this reason to go to war? Right? You didn't complain, well, you may have complained about it, right? But you didn't go to war over it, right? Now why all of a sudden is this time for war? Especially when this was a wartime exigency. Right? British didn't do this all the time. They did it when they went to war and they really needed a lot of manpower in their navy. They would grab these people, and that exigency would end with the termination of the Napoleonic Wars, right? Which were only 3 years away. Now they didn't know that's going to be 3 years, but it's not going to last forever, right? They probably knew it wouldn't be much longer, based on the progress of the war. All right, summary. Is impressment of sailors on American merchant ships sufficient cause for the War of 1812 when Britain claimed that they were British deserters, and I'm sure the vast majority of people they took were. Naturalized Americans could also have been British deserters. The U.S. failed to issue naturalization papers. The British had been impressing American sailors from the start of the war, 19 years going on, right? So why is this suddenly a cause for war at this point, at this late stage? British impressment of sailors was but a wartime exigency, and the Napoleonic Wars would not last forever, or even much longer. They would end within 3 years. So why to go to war over this? Over this, right? Is this sufficient cause for starting a war? I say no. All right. All right. Now, the 1807 British Order Council, which obstructed U.S. trade with continental Europe. Right. So here's a little background. The British had been, using their naval dominance to blockade, to block, continental Europe commerce. And in 1806, they issued an edict, right, where they said we're gonna blockade all the ports from the River Elbe to Brest, right? That's near Cherbourg, right? Elbe is like Germany, near the left base of Denmark, right? So it's pretty much the whole coast on that England faces, including the Channel, right? I don't know if you can visualize that. All right, now. So they said, okay, the Americans are like, well, this is blocking our trade with Europe. You can't do that. We're neutral. We can trade with Europe, even though they're your enemy. There's neutrality laws. International law at the time allowed for trade between neutrals and a combatant, right? All right, so Britain, here's something. Britain rescinded the Order of Council 5 days after we declared war, taking away this excuse for our fighting them, right? So, they didn't want to fight us, right? Why? Because their main focus was in Europe. That was their life and death struggle. They didn't need to split their efforts, with a sideshow in their backside, right? So we declared war on June 18th, and then five days later they rescinded the order, right? They declared they're going to rescind this on June 16th. They said, they announced they're going to rescind this. Now, predictably, some will attack. Well, the British rescinding of their Order of Council could not have been in response to the U.S. declaration of war, because it takes longer than 5 days for information to transit to Britain by sailboat. I mean, come on, right? Britain had diplomats and spies in the U.S., right? In fact, a fundamental function of diplomats is to be spies. In any event, they're all information gatherers, right? Reporting on what's going on, right? Gathering information, gathering intelligence. And you don't initiate a war without first, one, discussing it among key leaders from key regions of the country to ascertain support. You don't start a war unless you got full support for this. Otherwise, it's going to be a failed effort to begin with. All right? And you don't start a war without making plans for the war, making material and manpower preparations for the war, which is mobilizing for the war, which you cannot, hide or hide very well, right? All of which cannot be completely hidden. Plus, I'm sure there was loose talk and rumors going about, right, that, the British got wind of, right? Predictably, some will attack. The U.S. leadership would not have gotten the word of British annulment of their Order of Council for at least a couple weeks, maybe 3 weeks, because, information from England would have to go across by sailboat, and it takes a while, not too fast, right? I mean, I'm saying so. As soon as they got that information, they could have stopped the war. If this was really the cause for the war, they would have stopped the war, right? When they found out, okay, the Order of Council has been annulled, right? Or negotiate some sort of settlement, right? Well, international law at that time protected trade between neutral countries and belligerent nations. Trade within Napoleon's empire was still supporting Britain's enemy. It's obvious that Britain did not. It's obvious why Britain did it, right? Plus, Britain has a long history of violating international laws. Well, here's another thing. This is kind of like the sequence of things. So in 1806, Britain declares, hey, all the ports from Brest to the River Elbe are shut, right? Blockaded, right? Well, Napoleon responds to that with his Berlin Decree, which he says, there will be no trade between neutrals and Great Britain, right? So he's doing essentially the same thing Great Britain's doing. Well, why didn't we declare war upon, France because of that? Well, okay, all right. Finally, let's see. Finally, the British Order of Council obstructing U.S. trade with continental Europe had been in effect since 1807. That's 5 years. Why is it suddenly so critical that we start a war with them now? Right? Review. The British Order of Council sought to prevent Americans from trading with Britain's enemy, so it was understandable, even though that was allowed by international law, right? Neutrality laws. The British Order Council was in effect since 1807. That's 5 years. So why is it suddenly so critical we go to war with them now? The British Order of Council was abolished 5 days after we declared war. So why didn't we stop the war after receiving word that that it was annulled, and when we could have stopped the war, right? Is this sufficient for cause for starting the war? I say BS again. Rescinding the Order of Council was like the Northern Congress passing the Corwin Amendment, right? So yeah, I liken this to after the 1860 election, in which the Republican Party in the North took control of the House, the Senate, and the president. Lincoln was elected, right? You know, winning a clean sweep, and then the southern states started seceding. We'll get into why, right? They're all saying, the southern states, oh, the North's going to free the slaves, the North's going to free the slaves, right? All right, and that was totally bogus. I'll explain that when we get to actual facts, right? There was no move in Congress to free the slaves, right? In fact, what they did is, after they seceded, they tried to undermine the northern controlled Congress tried to undermine the southern excuse, right, which is trying to free the slaves. Well, listen, no one's trying to free the slaves, right? And in fact, we'll pass this Corn Amendment, which protects your right to have slaves by a constitutional amendment. This is not just a regular law, any standard. This is an amendment to the Constitution which guarantees your right to have slaves. And they said, we'll give you New Mexico Territory as a slave state. Take that as a slave state. And then they passed the Crittenden resolution, which said, we resolve not to free the slaves through this war. Right? Now, that was really more for to keep allegiance of the border states, which were slave states that maintained their, they stayed in the Union, right? All right, but anyways, okay, yeah. Oh, yeah. I was gonna say. So yeah, they're trying to undercut, cut the legs out from under any argument to go to war, right? All right. Same thing here. They rescinded this order, saying, listen, we'll take it back, right? You don't have to go to war over this, right? So they took this back, but we still went to war. And in both cases, it was because that the warring parties had a bigger agenda, bigger goals in mind. And these were just the surface. For example, freeing the slaves, there was no movement to free the slaves. There's nothing in Congress to free the slaves. There was no political backing to free the slaves, right, in 1860, right? It was all about political power, which meant legislative power, which means, the fortunes of wealth and how well your economy is going to do, and there was completely different economies, north to south, right? And this was the South had no hope. They just had to check out, and they used slavery as an excuse more to rally young white men to go fight. We'll get into that. I mean, people are going to say, no, that's not what I read. But all right, I'll have to analyze that and lay that out, show you all the facts around it, right? All right. So it's the same thing, right? Both cases, they passed this. Hey, we guarantee your right to keep slaves. You don't have to fight us. And the South said, well, screw that. Right? They kept saying, they're going to free the slaves. They're going to free the slaves. Okay. British supply weapons to the Indians in the Great Lakes region, preventing American settlement of the Northwest Territory. British reason for this, their stated reason is, we want to give the Indians a nation. I mean, I'm thinking, are you kidding me, right? You think the British really gave a rat's ass about the Indians, right? The way they killed and abused and, dominated natives around the world. All around the world they did this, right? Another reason is they wanted to create a buffer zone to prevent American invasion of British Canada. Okay, this seems kind of reasonable because, well, Britain was vulnerable at that time. They had a maximum effort, full-blown effort just to stay alive, in the Napoleonic Wars, right? And they could not afford a two-front war, right? So by arming the Indians, what it really was, today we'd call it proxy wars, right? Proxy wars, you can fight proxy wars on the cheap. All you need is like a committed people. Indians were committed because they're fighting for their lives. They're fighting for their land, right? Their livelihood, right? And you just give them some weapons, they'll fight pretty hard, right? So proxy wars typically, are fought on the cheap, right? You just got to make sure that their war efforts, their underlying motive may not align with yours. But so long as their war effort aligns with your goals for your war effort, right? Only you don't want them to backlash later on, and they have a different agenda, and then they're going against you, and they're armed with your weapons. That's often a problem with proxy wars. Um, so proxy war, arming insurgents, right? That makes sense. It's fighting a war on the cheap by arming these guys, right? And you're preventing them for, you're creating a buffer zone to prevent an American invasion of Canada. And Americans are expansive. We're constantly expanding, right? To prevent American settlement of the Great Lakes region. I believe this is another key factor. And I've never read anything about this, right? Right? It's just amazing that no one sees this, right? So, if Americans expanded into Great Lakes region, that would result in a great increase of American wealth and population size, because the fertile agricultural lands of the Midwest would allow growth in their population. And on the flip side, American population was growing rapidly with a lot of immigrants coming in still, right? And we needed to feed those people, right? So we had to expand into the Midwest, the Northwest territory. All right. So you increase American wealth and population size. These combine for military strength, creating a greater competitor to Britain in North America and perhaps internationally as well, right? Including the Caribbean islands and Latin America. And Latin America became a key source of British economic salvation during the Napoleonic Wars, right? So in the Napoleonic Wars, Napoleon set up the continental system, which locked Britain out of the continent from trading with them, right? They lost all that trade, but England did not skip a beat. In fact, their GDP grew, almost doubled during those wars, right? And they kept their trade throughout the world. All right, let's just take a look at the world trade. Where do I go here? Okay, here's a map of the world. So here's Great Britain. There's Great Britain there, right? They're trading with Canada. That's one of their colonial possessions. They lost us as a colonial possession, but they're still trading with us, right? They have interest in the Caribbean, right? And now they're developing trade with Latin America. We'll talk about the size of that growth rate. And plus, they still have their other possessions. And I don't think they're really expanding into interior Africa yet. I know they have the Cape of Good Hope down here. They have some points here. They have Straits of Hormuz. The big trade with India, and that went hand in hand with China, especially the opium trade. I mean, it wasn't just opium. It was, tea and silk and porcelain, all that stuff, right? But the key element was opium, right? Which made that trade possible because they ran into a currency problem, I don't want to get into that, right? It was about limitation of silver, but they had to make China into a bunch of opium addicts. Right? And Indies, spice, so forth. Right? So they had a lot of trades to Australia and New Zealand down there. They're still part of the British Empire. So they did okay. Now Europe was sucking wind because they're all blockaded, right? But a key thing was growth of Latin America, right? Because that went from zero pretty much, or real small. So let's see. In 4 years, right? Only 4 years between 1805 to 1809. So remember all the orders of council was 1807, right? Napoleon stuff was 1806, right? All right. So between then, the Latin America trade exports to Latin America rose from 300,000 pounds in 1805 to 6.3 million pounds in 1809. Right? That's an increase of 21 times, right? So this was a key factor in, a key shift of economic prosperity, right? They lost Europe, but they picked this up here, right? And UK GDP grew from 140 million in 1792 to 335 million. That's roughly uh, double towards the end of the war, right? And I add here, by the end of the 19th century, the U.S. would flex its muscles. So, as evidence of this, we started pushing against. I mean, as evidence, we became the dominant investor in Latin America. You know, that became our little realm, right? And we fought a bunch of banana wars to hold it. And we started pushing against Great Britain towards the end of the 19th century in four incidents. The first was in Chile, right? We're flexing our muscles against Great Britain, you know, by then. And then you had Nicaragua in 1894. Then you had Brazil, 1894. And you had Venezuela incident in 1895. Again, all these cases were pushing against Great Britain here. All right. Okay, now in Latin America. And I just kind of write it aside here. This is my, I guess, my assessment. All right. You can take it for what it's worth, right? But the U.S. threat to Latin America and the Caribbean was significant because we had shorter lines of communication. All right. In order for Britain to sustain their efforts there, they had to have bases, whether it's in the Caribbean or or in Latin America, right? They had to establish naval bases there, right? We have our country close by, so we have short lines of communication. It gives us an advantage, and I believe it's a similar analogy to Japan and Asia in the late 1800s, like especially 1890. When was the Sino-Japanese War? 1893, 1894, I believe, right? Or 1894, 95, around there somewhere, right? And what happened is Japan emerged as an imperial power. Now, Asia was being carved up by European countries, right? And only Japan really held out because they westernized. After the Meiji Restoration in 1867, they rapidly westernized, industrialized, and took on Western naval power, Western army and industry. And by 1894, they were able to fight a war with China and defeat them, and then force upon them a treaty called the Treaty of Shimonoseki, which they got a lot of stuff from them. One is the Korean Peninsula, one is Formosa, and a few other islands. But anyways, right, that really threatened the Europeans, right? And they reacted right away with what's called the Triple Intervention. And the very next year, they forced Japan to give up everything that it got from the Treaty of Shimonoseki, right? They ganged up on them, said, okay, right, you give it all up, right? And I'm sure the Japanese were smarting at this. They're saying, we're doing nothing any different than you are, right? So they forced them to give it up, right? And I think the reason why is because they saw the Japanese threat, right? They had long lines of communication with Asia. Look at Russia, for example, right? Trying to get stuff over there to support a war effort. Whereas Japan is right there. So here's China. Here's China. Here's the Korean Peninsula. Here's Japan. It's right there, right? Right. Short lines of communication. Better sustain a war effort. Now, so what happened was they gave, the forces gave it up. But who moved in? Well, the Europeans. It kind of kicked off a scramble for Europeans, carving up Asia, right? Russia moved down into Manchuria hard, right? Into the Korean Peninsula. Germany moved into the Shantung about the same time. They're moving into the Shantung Peninsula pretty hard, right? Over here. And I kind of like use an analogy here. So Japan, kind of like a current affairs analogy. Japan was kind of like COVID-19, right? And the Europeans, they rushed to carve up Asia, kind of like, hoarding toilet paper, right? And then the United States scrambled. The United States saw this and said, oh, crap, we're going to be cut out of the Asian market. So they scrambled to get their share of toilet paper, right? And then we had the Spanish-American War, right? Now, I know a lot of people are going to say, well, no, I don't understand the Spanish-American War that way. Well, okay. All right. Where are we at here? All right. So, in any event, so I think that's the fundamental reason why underlying this is the broader strategic vision of why Great Britain was supplying weapons to the Indians, right? But in any event, it demonstrated that Great Britain was going to give us trouble. They're going to give us a long fight over the future border, and that future border was all unsettled, right? So this is kind of rough. Well, this is a map of the United States. This border was totally unsettled where it was, right? I mean, this was settled already, right? With well, um, this was ceded to the United States with the Revolutionary War, right? All this was unsettled. Where this was undetermined, right? And British Canada was here. Right? All this was British Canada. They claimed this territory here. Um, Here's the Louisiana Purchase territory, right? And what it showed is if they're not even going to grant us this land here, which they ceded to us, right? Well, they're going to give us a fight all along here. So even the Louisiana Purchase territory is not secure, right? Oregon territory, which is over here, this is Oregon territory, that was up for grabs, right? And then the Southwest U.S. You could say it was up for grabs. And I'll give you some examples from history. Um, so much later, in 1844, all right, President Polk uh, campaigned for president, and his motto was 54-40 fight. Right here, he's saying this is where we want. This is where we want the border with Canada. Right, we want all this territory up to here. Right, and roughly this area is Rocky Mountains. Right. This is where the border is today, 49th parallel. All right. And so this was all undetermined, right? Now, why did he pick that? I don't know. I'm guessing. I'm guessing this was to put leverage on them, right? And this would take away their access to Canada's access to the Pacific Ocean. I believe Russia, Alaska came down to here. We didn't get Alaska until like 1867, right? So this would pretty much cut off any Canadian access to the Pacific, right? And why he made the border here? Well, I'm guessing, you know, this border, you could have taken this area. This is Canada's breadbasket, though. This is their great agricultural area. This is their grain belt, right? If you took this, you try to take this, you'd have a huge fight. We wouldn't have won that war, right? This is their lives. They would have fought like crazy over this, right? And we wouldn't have won that. Just like we didn't win the War of 1812 with taking Canada. All right. So what am I saying here? Um, so in 1812, water was bulk transportation, and the British knew the strategic importance of controlling shipping routes, right? Lines of communication on the oceans, right? As an example, here's a map that I made of all the points, all the key strategic choice points that Canada took, or Britain took, right? You know, they took the Greenland, Iceland, UK gap. They took they controlled the space in the channel there. They took Gibraltar, right? To control access between Atlantic and Mediterranean. They took the Falkland Islands to control the access down there. That was before, of course, way before the Panama Canal. They took Suez Canal. They controlled the Bosphorus Dardanelles going into the Black Sea. They controlled the Cape of Good Hope and tip of South Africa. They controlled the Gulf of Aden. They controlled the Straits of Hormuz. They controlled the tip of India. They controlled the Malacca Straits, right? I mean, they took control. They understood controlling strategic waterways, right? Waterways meant bulk transportation. Bulk transportation meant getting things to market. That meant profit. That meant your national wealth, right? Okay. So they knew that they could keep the U.S. weak if they blocked access to the Great Lakes. Right? No transportation, no access to markets, no resource production, no wealth. Right? You cannot produce all these resources if you have no way of getting it to market. Let's say you grow all, like tons and tons of grain. If you can't get it to the market, it's just going to sit there and rot, right? So, it's not worth your effort. You're just going to go broke, right? And with no wealth for the country, you keep U.S. weak, and they would do so to protect the North American ambitions. They had ambitions for North America, right? They knew they'd be competing with us, right? And I'm saying, Britain were strategic visionaries. They no doubt saw America as a future competitor for domination in the Caribbean and Latin America, both of which were cash cows for them, especially the growth of the Latin American market after Napoleon threw up his continental system. All right. So other real reasons for war, I say real, I think the first two were incredibly weak reasons. These were just like lame excuses, right? Trying to put it on the British, right? I mean, the British were blocking our access to the Great Lakes region, right? But these are lame excuses, right? Order of Council, which they rescinded, right? Other real reasons for war are this, right? So in 1812, Britain was really our only remaining competitor to conquering the entire North American continent, right? Right? That's our ambition. Develop, expand west, right? Grow. Now, France was no longer a competition. France sold out in 1803, Louisiana Purchase, right? France, Napoleon understood the importance of revenue to fight a war, and he tried to make a go of his American colonies, especially was Haiti or yeah, right. And he suffered some setbacks there. Malaria's army, constant revolutions down there. And then also Britain ruled the seas, so what good is going to do? He tried to make a go of it with sugar production, but didn't pan out. So he sold out. He said, it's not going to work. I'll get some quick cash, help fight my wars. So he sold out for 15 million. France is out. That means France is out. This territory here is ours. Of course, it's the Indians, but we say it's ours. Right? Spain was weak. Right? Now, the reason why Spain was weak is after Napoleon set up his continental system, there was a lot of British smuggling going in through Portugal and then through Spain. Right? So he had to shut that down. Right? If you leave that open, it just destroys the entire continental system, right? So he invaded Spain, and then he kicked the Spanish crown off the throne, right? First Charles IV relinquished his reign to his son. We kicked them both out. Napoleon kicked them both out, right? And so they're basically headless. Napoleon put his brother on the throne, right? And then Spain's American colonies started revolting, right? They're like, hey, right, this is our opportunity. So beginning in 1809, Ecuador, Bolivia, here's Ecuador, Bolivia's here, they revolted. 1810, Mexico, Colombia, Venezuela, Argentina, Peru revolted, right? And then in 1811, Paraguay, that's Paraguay, they revolted, right? All right, so pretty much, and I'm not sure with these Central American countries. I'm sure revolted too. It looks like they're colored here. That's their date of independence. So they revolted as well. Basically, all of Spain's American colonies are revolting. Right? Spain is headless. They're being invaded by France. They're weak. Right? They're fighting to stay alive here against Napoleon. Right? They're fighting to keep all this here. Right? They couldn't do anything. And so we had a disputed border on the western border of the Louisiana Purchase, but they couldn't do anything, right? Now, if we're gonna make this adventuristic uh, push north to grab Canada here, going up north here, well, our backside would be vulnerable. But vulnerable to what? Spain has nothing. Oh goodness, what's going on here? Uh, Battery's going out a little bit. All right. Uh, so our backside is secure. That's what I'm saying. If we're going to make a big push north, well, our backside is secure. And in 1812, Britain was fighting for its life against Napoleon, right? And thus could not devote much resources to fight a U.S. effort to seize Canada. They're arming the Indians, trying to fight that on the cheap, right? And the war would not last forever. So what I'm saying is, this was our golden opportunity. It was now or never, or the window of opportunity will close. All right. Closing window of opportunity. What do I have right here? So here's Europe in 1812. Okay. Napoleon has everything except for a couple places. There's Portugal, there's Britain, that's Sardinia, this is Sicily, but he's got everything else, right? Britain had its butt exposed in North America with the Napoleonic Wars. That's why they rescinded the order of the council, right? They tried to avoid a two-front war, right? So they were vulnerable. That's why. That's a key reason why we attacked in 1812, right? Now the war would evict Britain from North American continent once and for all, resolving an expected long and continuous struggle with Britain over the Canadian border. Remember, I said that's all unsettled. That wasn't settled to 1846 with the Oregon Treaty, right? So in 1812, who knew what's going to happen, right? Now Britain's given trouble in the Northwest Territory. They're going to give trouble all the way west, right? And like I said, in 1844, President Polk is pushing for this line here. Also, I can't think here. What was that I'm thinking here? Oh, yeah, in 1844, Polk was worried about Britain taking California, right? He wrote in his diary, he's worried that Britain's going to make a move to take California, right? All this territory, Washington, Oregon, California, right? And that was the reason why he sent Slidell to make a purchase offer to Mexico, right? But I never read anywhere where that actually was. I read all the documents, U.S. government documents for published on the diplomatic communications prior to the Mexican American War, and Slidell never made it an offer to purchase that I read, right? So I don't know how genuine that was. Okay. All right, the war would evict Britain from North American continent, right? So that would eliminate the problem of the long battle over the border, right? Plus, we'd have free reign, free access to anything we want in North America, all of Canada, everything in Western current USA, right? All we have to do is fight the Indians and then kick the Mexicans out of, well, it was Spanish at the time, but then, they're fighting with the Mexicans for independence, and we would just have to fight the Mexicans, who would be weak. With Britain defeated and out of North America, the U.S. have free reign in controlling the entire land and resources, wealth of North America, Canada included. Only the Southwest North America remained in Spanish hands, but they were fighting to hang on against a multitude of revolutions, right? We would later initiate the Mexican-American War and take that from them. Examples, or here are some examples of how the British would fight us. Already they're blocking us from territory that they ceded to us. So they in treaty assigned us the Northwest Territory, and then they're blocking our ability to occupy and develop that by arming the Indians. So you think they won't fight us in the disputed territories all the west of the way, right? west. Example of ongoing fight in 1844, Polk wanted 54-40 fight. And this is what I'm thinking, you know. One is he could do this to deny Canada a Pacific port, because I believe 54-40 was pretty much the southern tip of Russia, Alaska, right? And that would weaken Canada. Um, or I believe it could have been a threat to the UK to be used as negotiating leverage for an advantageous settlement of the Canadian border, which they did eventually settle on a couple years later in 1846 with the Oregon Treaty. So that's a possibility. I'm thinking, you know, I haven't studied that, but I'm thinking, you know, he's probably thinking this, you know, did he really want that land? Maybe, but it could also have been bargaining leverage. All right. Example of the ongoing fight. In the same year, Polk feared that Britain would seize California. Right in 1844, he wrote in his diary he's afraid, Britain's going to go for California, and so he offered to purchase California from Mexico. Yeah, that was that Slidell thing for 25 million, but I never seen the actual offer presented to Mexico, right? And we'll get to that when we get to the Mexican-American War. But it's adding another motive to the Mexican-American War. In essence, grab California from Mexico before Great Britain could get it, right? American politicians believed that the Canadians would welcome annexation by the United States. So that was another factor. All right. So evidence, we expected a long drawn-out fight with Great Britain. You know, this is the Northwest Territory. They ceded that to us, and they're still not allowing us to occupy that because the Army of the Indians, who are fighting us, preventing Americans from occupying, which is their homeland, right? And then the Oregon Territory was totally up for grabs. All right, if they're fighting us here, right? I mean, that tells us they're not going to make it easy over the Louisiana Purchase Territory, which ran roughly over here, right? Oregon's over here, right? Now, Oregon Territory was totally up for grabs, all right? And then Polk makes his 54-40 fight. Hey, we want all this area up to here. And I believe, I'm not sure how, like Russian Alaska came down the coast here some ways. I'm not sure where 54-40 is, all right? Somewhere around here, all right? And finally, Polk feared that Britain would take California. All right, so all this was up in the air, right? You get Britain out of the continent, you don't have to worry about any of this, right? You see what I'm saying? All right? So they're like, let's get Britain out of the continent once and for all. All right? All right. Now, between ratification of the Constitution in 1788 and the start of War 1812, the U.S. population nearly doubled, right? So that's a factor. So here you got 1790, right? Roughly when we came to country, right? And here's 1810, roughly start of War of 1812. Look at the population; it's doubled, right? Now, the problem with that is population's doubling. However, the New England climate and soil were inferior for agriculture, right? This put a premium on securing the Northwest Territory from the Indians with its fertile lands, and especially the Great Lakes waterway, to transport bulk food and building material to East Coast markets. It's not going to do you any good to produce that stuff if you can't get in the market, all right? And that required the waterways, because if you don't have the waterways, I mean, just think about it, right? There's no roads, there's no highways paved, right? So and plus you're going with small volume horse and donkey or cart, all right, with wheels busting, right? Going over treacherous terrain, right? Having to cross rivers for which there are no bridges. It's not happening. There's multiple streams and rivers all going across here, right? The only real route was waterway, right? And that became a key source of fight for the War of 1812. All right, so another factor is look at the growth of population in the Midwest, which is the Northwest Territory, right? Grew turn of the century from 51,000 here. 1790 I'm saying roughly zero, right? and then it's grown to 51,000. Then by 1810, it has grew 6 times to nearly 300,000. All right. Okay, so it's growing, and we got to protect those people. All right, that's what the government's probably thinking there against the Indians. So Britain's arming the Indians, and this is kind of an aside. I only bring this up because this table shows population in the West. In 1840, there's roughly 0, right? In 1850, there's 178,000, right? And then it jumps in 1860 at the time of the Civil War, right? And really, it really expands greatly after that, 1870s and so past, right? And this is because of the Civil War. The Civil War really opened up Western expansion. But another factor is this. Look at this. Population there was 0 in 1840, right? This was also the big boom of immigrants coming into the United States. For whatever reason, the development of steamships, right? Cunard had his first transatlantic steam liner in 1840, but the bigger factors were things like the potato famine, in England, Ireland, right? And other things were like revolutions, 1848 revolutions, instability in Central Europe, the German regions, right? Right. And that resulted in a big immigration boost, spike in going to America, right, between 1840 and 1860, and 9 out of 10 immigrants went to the North because that's where opportunity was, right? Now, at the same time, there was no opportunity, with especially with the Southern slave plantation owners dominating, resources and best you can be like a sharecropper, right? So look at this growth of people going out west. I'm willing to bet, I don't know the actual numbers, but I'm willing to bet that a large portion of these were Southerners, right? They're saying, crap, there's no opportunity here in the South. Let's go west, right? Now, when they go west, right, where's the economic alignment in the West? It's aligned with the North, right? Not the South, right? So what does that mean for political alignment? The Western political alignment was always with the North. They're aligned, right? It was the Northern East Coast industrial with the Westerners, right? Because that was an integrated economy. And then you had the South, right? So these guys are part of the flip to Northern political interest, right? If Southerners went there. And this is all background to the big shift in political power. It's part of their dynamics, right? That really underlied the Civil War, right? That's just an aside. It's a minor point of it. I don't want to get distracted with it, but I just saw this and I'm thinking, oh, yeah. So I say, what if many were from the South? Add this to European immigrants who were flooding to the North, 9 out of 10, right? Which is shifting the demographics, right, towards the North. In fact, in 1860, the northern population was double the population of the South, slaves included. And slaves, according to the Constitution, whatever article that was, right, they're worth only 3/5 of representation of a vote of a person, right? So it spelled doom for the South by the 1860 election, right? And who did the West align with economically? Well, with the North. And thus, they aligned politically with the North, right? You had the Republican Party putting out, that rolled out from the Free Land Party, right? Free Soil Party, free soil, free land to anyone who wants it, which later became the Homestead Act. Okay, so now another thing is, look at this, right? I mean, where were the key naval battles, right? On the Great Lakes. Key battles, like at choke points, like at Detroit, right? You had key battles along the Hudson River. There's Lake Champlain, right? This is all water transportation routes, right? And then look at when the Erie Canal was developed. Shortly after, they started building this shortly after the War of 1812, right? And look at the impact of this, right? This opened up, when this opened up the Great Lakes region to commercial expansion, right, to resource production, right? Now you can get stuff, let's see here, anything in this region be taken to the Great Lakes, sent through here, right? What was that Huron, Michigan, Huron, Erie, Ontario? Oh no, actually, with the Erie Canal, this is Niagara Falls, roughly around there. Erie Canal taps in just before that you hit the falls, right? Kind of winds around this way, right? And kind of, I guess it kind of parallels this road, I'm guessing, right? I know it kind of goes this way, and then it hits Albany, right, which became the capital of New York. It is capital. And then you get the Hudson River, and it heads down straight to New York, right? So all the commodities that are produced here are sent this way. This became the hub for commodities, right? The commodities market, New York City, and that it would remain so until really the development of railroads, right? Railroads were developing more, and the Midwest region was developing more further west with cattle and so forth. And Chicago became the hub, especially after they developed that Illinois-Michigan Canal, which basically linked the Chicago rivers with the Illinois River. And so goods could go this way, goods could go down the Mississippi, right? Either way, right? And in any event, Chicago became the commodities hub for the country. And you had the Chicago Board of Trade developed the same year. Yeah, so look at this, right? With development of railroads, plus you had the Illinois and Michigan Canal, 1848. And what are they doing? They're getting the Chicago Board of Trade going, 1848, right? Chicago became the commodities hub. All right, so I want to do a review. Right now, I gave you a lot of information, but hopefully I can wrap it up and make better sense of it with a summary here, kind of simplify things. Here in the left box here, you have the stated reasons for starting the War of 1812. I'm saying these are the real big picture reasons for the U.S. starting the war. And we're going to look at it in terms of motive. It's like a court thing, what cops do, right? Cops look for motive, they look for opportunity, they look for evidence, right? So that's basically the same thing. Motives, opportunity, and evidence, right? So let's review the stated reasons. We said the one reason was British impressment of sailors on American merchant vessels. However, British claim that they're deserters, and I'm willing to bet the vast line share that were deserters, right? Although you don't fully trust the British, they're going to grab extra people they could, I'm sure. But they did have a legitimate big deserter problem, right? Some of these deserters could have been naturalized Americans, right? But that would lead to, well, what's the question on legality, right? Who has jurisdiction here, right? Jurisdiction is whoever has force, pretty much, right? Between the U.S. and America at that point. The U.S. failed to issue naturalization papers, so that was on us. That even if they're nationalized, right? The British would say, "Hey, I don't care if they're naturalized, right? They're still deserters, right? Plus, you can't prove it. They have no papers, so they're going to take these guys, right?" The British had been impressing American sailors from the start of the war for 19 years. Why is it so suddenly such a cause for war at this late stage, right? And that's going to lead down to here. We're going to see what the real cause is about opportunity, right? American opportunity for the war. British impressment of sailors is but a temporary wartime exigency. And, this is going on because of the war. And that war is not going to last forever, right? War's over. They're going to stop this. So why are you going to fight a war over something that's going to end, not much longer, only 3 years it turned out, right? You're going to fight a whole war over this? Some sailors be taken, and it's not going to last much longer. You're going to fight a war over this? Come on, right? Most of them were British deserters, so what the hell? British Order in Council, however, Napoleon had his Berlin Decree, so Napoleon's doing the same thing. Why don't we go against war against France, right? Britain Order of Council sought to prevent Americans from trading with Britain's enemy. So, it's understandable, but you know what? in modern war, we'd say, screw it, we're going to stop everything, right? Back then, they had neutrality laws, right? That the accepted international law, largely due to mercantilism reigning supreme, was that if you're a neutral country, you can trade with belligerent countries and everything except contraband, which are direct war materials, right? Munitions, weapons, whatever, explosives, cannons. If it's food, they allow that. Right? British Order of Council was in effect since 1807. That's 5 years. If it's in why suddenly is it cause for war? This is 19 years. This is 5 years. Now you're going to make war over this, right? When Napoleon's got the same thing going. The British Order Council was abolished 5 days after we declared it. So they abolished this. This is no longer a reason for war, but yet we maintain the war, right? Now, people are going to say, well, it takes about 2-3 weeks for word to get back. Well, still, even then, as soon as you get word, you stop the war. If this is the reason for the war, you stop the war. British arming of Indians in the Northwest Territory. We said that the British said that, well, we want to give the Indians a nation. Yeah, right. They wanted to make a buffer zone to protect Canada from Americans when their backside is exposed with their effort against Napoleon. Okay, that's understandable, right? Remember we said they can fight a war on the cheap through a proxy war, just funneling weapons to the Indians who are, they're going to be fierce fighters because they're fighting for their lives, their homeland, right? To obstruct American resource development, right, of the Northwest Territory. And I believe, you'll never see this stated in any history text, right? I believe if you know the British, their history, you know that they're solid strategic thinkers, right, with foresight on how to set up resource development, resource transportation. And they know that if they keep the Northwest Territory, especially the Great Lakes, out of our hands, we couldn't develop that territory. We couldn't develop that territory. We can't grow in wealth. We couldn't grow in population. We couldn't become a powerhouse that could someday threaten them, that would fight with them over a border going west, right? Where that was totally undetermined, right? Who's going to take that, right? And also really over all the Americas, not just Canada, but Caribbean and Mexico, Latin America, everything, right? Which eventually the U.S. came to dominate commercially. British interests in the Caribbean and Latin America, Latin America became their cash cow, one of their salvations during the Napoleonic Wars. They're cut out of Europe, the European continent. Well, they turned to Latin America, and that was a big increase there. Plus, they had all the other, trade relations, especially within their colonial system, Canada, Australia, New Zealand, so forth, right? And India was a colony of theirs. That was huge, right? Trade with China, their opium thing. They developed their opium monopoly in India, I believe, like 1773 or something like that. All right, so real big picture, U.S. motivations with France selling out in 1803 and Spain weak. Remember, Spain was invaded by Napoleon, fighting for their life. Plus, they're fighting like a jailbreak across the board. Every damn colonial American colony they had was revolting, fighting a revolution, right? So they have their hands full, right? Now, given that the only real remaining competitor to U.S. domination of the North American continent was Great Britain, right? That's a motivation. Get Great Britain out, it's all ours, right? By arming the Indians in the Northwest Territory, Great Britain proved it was going to give us a fight. It was going to fight and claw with the U.S. over border, right? And that was a territory that they had ceded to us, right? In the Paris Treaty after the Revolutionary War. And that showed the newly acquired Louisiana Territory, 1803, was not secure from British designs. Plus, the Oregon Territory was still wide open for grabs. All right, it was kind of settled in 1818 that there would be mutual occupation by Americans and British, right? But that's still up for grabs. And like I said, even the Southwest U.S. was not secure. Even as late as 1844, Polk writes in his diary he feared that the British were going to take California. We got to get this right before they get it. In any event, it portended a long, drawn-out border fight with Britain. Right, get them kicked out. Right, this would solve the whole problem. You fight, So I say this: invading Canada was less about seizing Canada and more about kicking the British out of North America once and for all. And once the Brits were out, all that would stand in the way for taking all of America, right, taking the entire North American continent, were the Indians, right? You got to kill them, kick them off. That was kind of unfortunate. And some weak Spanish in the Southwest, right? Spain was weak, right? And then later the Mexicans. The Mexicans were weak, right? After they attained their independence in 1821, right? And they would be comparative easy pickings compared to the fight with a major European power, right? So we can push them over and take the land. With a successful war, the U.S. would acquire all Canadian resources, land, ports, people, right? British were blocking U.S. growth by obstructing resource development of the fertile Northwest Territory, right? Arming the Indians. U.S. population was growing rapidly, doubling in 20 years only between 1790 and 1810. And this would require increased food production, for which the climate and soil in New England was ill-suited, and that placed a premium on securing the land and transport to market from the Northwest Territory. But Britain was arming the Indians there, no doubt to keep the U.S. weak and to secure their interests in North America, to protect their Canadian, colony there. The American population in the Midwest was beginning to grow, starting from zero in 1870 at the start of our country, to in 20 years, 292,000, right? And with arming the Indians, you had to protect them, right? So lastly, there was a prevalent belief among the U.S. leadership that the Canadians would welcome American invaders with open arms. And I put ha-ha there because, you know what happens, almost exclusively when you have foreign military invasion and occupation, especially a prolonged occupation, right? Well, that grows into an insurgency, right? Some underground guerrilla movement, insurgency, right? All right, so U.S. opportunity. Now I say, 19 years of doing this, 5 years of doing this. Why so critical now? Well, really, it was more about U.S. opportunity, the opportune moment. So Britain was still locked in a life and death struggle with Napoleon, which required their maximum concentrated effort. They could little afford a two-front war at that time. Thus, their American backside was vulnerable to attack. This was seen in the rescinding of the Order of Council, right? And this opportunity would slam shut with the end of the European War. As soon as this war is over, England could devote far greater resources to fighting us in the Americas, right? So our opportunity was limited, right? I'm not sure how they assessed the progress in the European War in 1812, right? I know a key factor was right about the same time we started the war, France invaded Russia. Napoleon's going into Russia. Right. Anyways, France sold out of America, so opportunity. France is already out. Spain was weak in 1811. It's facing revolution throughout its entire colonial, territories, all of it, right? Thus, our backside would be secure as we threw everything we had into an adventurous campaign against British Canada, right? We wouldn't have to worry about Spain making a grab into the Louisiana Territory, saying that this is ours, whatever, Given these, it was now or never time, right? And again, France invaded Russia. We declared war on June 18th. They invaded in June 24th. So again, people are going to say, well, this could have been effective. Oh, come on. This is prior to railroads, right? Which is more rapid mobilization. Mobilization back then was slow. You want to build up an invasion force, it's going to take a lot of time, right? It's going to be a big movement of horses and wagons and so forth, right? And we have diplomats over there. We have military observers who are watching U.S. military professionals, right, who are observing that war, right? There's communication. They know exactly what's going on, right? So they know Napoleon's about to invade Russia for a long time. It's not going to happen fast, right? Okay. So mobilization is going to be seen, right? And I'm not sure how this was a factor. I'm kind of thinking, they're thinking this is going to bode well for Great Britain, and when Napoleon rushes off to go fight, in the cold Russian weather here. I don't know. I'm not sure what they're thinking, but that could have been a factor. All right. Evidence. So evidence was a big naval war on the Great Lakes and other key waterways, right? Hudson River, Lake Champlain, right? Key battles at strategic choke points. I mentioned like Detroit was a key point of interest there. So don't tell me the fight over water transportation wasn't key, right? U.S. would obtain access to the Great Lakes waterway up to the city of Cornwall. Let's see, what I got on the map there. Okay, let's see here. Okay, yeah. So here's the Great Lakes. We would split, with Canada, the waterway up to the town of Cornwall right there, right? And then the country kind of cuts over here across, just above Lake Champlain there, right? But what's important is the fact that we got it up to here, because here's the Niagara Falls. I'm sure they wanted to avoid a portage. I'm not sure what the engineering back then was for locks going down but they would cut the Erie Canal across here to Albany. Where's Albany? Roughly around there somewhere, right? Oh no, Albany's there. I'm sorry, Albany's there. All right. Erie Canal was built almost immediately after the war, right? And this opened up the Northwest Territory to resource development. So here's my conclusion. Without any question, the United States started the war. Again, the series of lectures on how U.S. starts wars. Well, I mean, this is a no-brainer. We started this war, right? And the question is why then, right? Well, the three stated reasons in history are typically these, right? British were impressing sailors off U.S. ships. I mean, this is so weak. It's almost laughable. British were obstructing trade with their order councils. Again, I showed you how this is weak, almost laughable. British were arming the Indians in the Northwest Territory. The question is why? Was it simply to protect their Canadian thing? Was it to keep America weak so that there would be a competition for the rest of North America, and also a future competition for British interest? British had interest throughout the entire Americas. Canada, United States, they maintained interest in the United States, right? They were a big exporter of capital to the United States for a long time, right? Why? Because of the great investment opportunity, right? Plus, they had, of course, big interest in southern cotton trade, especially after their machine manufacturing of textiles ramped up there. That became a huge source of wealth for them, and they relied upon American cotton, right? And they had interest in Caribbean islands, right? And again, South America became a huge boon to them, a cash cow to them that helped them, when they lost all that European trade with Napoleon's continental system, right? Now, of these three reasons, the first two are exceedingly weak to the point of being irrelevant, I'm saying, right? I mean, come on, right? Now, only the British Army of the Indians was significant. Typical history texts fail to recognize the broader strategic picture, right? They fail to recognize the strategic picture for future claims in North American territory, fight between British. Well, the fact that everyone is out except for the British, right? You got Spain down there, but Spain is weak, right? And then they fail to recognize the strategic picture for the entire Western Hemisphere, especially British interests along the entire length, from Canada down, right? And we would challenge them beginning in, as you said, Chile was 1891, Nicaragua 1894, Brazil 1894, Venezuela 1895, right? And then we would later become the dominant commercial a power in Latin America. Uh, okay, they fail. Okay, they fail to recognize their strategic picture in relation to the European conflict. One is Britain being preoccupied with a life and death struggle, and that war not going to last forever. So it was a closing window of opportunity. And you had Spain's weakness with Napoleon invading and all their American possessions from Mexico. Mexico was roughly here, down through Central America, and all this Venezuela, Peru. This is kind of Brazil here, everything around here. All this was breaking free. This is, they're all revolting, fighting revolutions, and Spain was weak. Right, so our backside was secure when we go and make an adventurous attack into Canada. Right, I believe British understood the strategic picture. Right, I mean, I haven't read. Yeah, I know from history what the British have done. I know they understand world strategy, and so they understood this. So historians' limited focus on impressment, order to council, and arming of Indians is wanting. Britain, of course, was pursuing its interests in all the Americas and the Caribbean. Canada, there were trade relations there. And they still maintained export even after we went independent. They maintained capital exports into the United States because it was a good investment opportunity, right? No, there's other reasons, because they lacked other investment opportunities that were better. For various other reasons, I'm not going to get into that, economics, but especially trade with with the South America. Oh, with the South, as machine manufacturing of textiles grew, right? Latin America, which they came to dominate commercially with the Napoleonic Wars. It's my view that the British strategic thinkers understood the potential for the United States growth in power to the point where Americans could threaten British economic supremacy in the Western Hemisphere, right? Which is what eventually happened anyways. Thus, they sought to stem the threat early by arming the Northwest Territory Indians. The purpose was not to give the Indians a nation, as they stated. In part, it could have been a cheap proxy war method of protecting their Canadian backside while they invested maximum effort to the Napoleonic Wars, right? Thus, in part, it was a buffer against American invasion into Canada. That's stated, right? Knowing the British penchant for strategic thinking, I believe it had a broader long-term strategic implications for not just ownership of North America, but for domination of all of the Americas, including the Caribbean and Latin America. Let's see, where am I at here? I haven't read a single thing on this, but I know the British were global strategic thinkers with strategic vision, right? Again, I'm not an expert in this war. I'm admitting that. In any event, most history texts overlook the opportunity for the U.S. Provided by the Napoleonic Wars, the vulnerability of Great Britain while in this life or death struggle, right? The invasion, Napoleon's invasion of Spain, and the jailbreak, making Spain, especially in the Americas, totally, irrelevant as a threat to our backside, allowing for our invasion up north, right? Without worrying about splitting forces and, how the window of opportunity might have been seen closing, especially with Napoleon's invasion of Russia, which would only bode well for Britain's chances. I'm not sure what indicators the U.S. leadership was watching as far as gauging the progress of the European war, but certainly they knew the war would not last forever, right? And once the war was over, the window of opportunity against Britain would be shut. For the United States, war with Canada was less about seizing Canada and more about kicking the Brits once and for all out of the continent to avoid a continuous border fight, which was pretty obvious with how they supported the Indians in the Northwest Territory, right? And it would thus open up all of North America to U.S. acquisition. Canada would be a side benefit. In some, the vision of typical history texts are limited and wanting. certainly myopic, almost to the point of being laughable. And that's my opinion. I think, my goodness, you seriously you think these little reasons are the reason why we went to war in Canada? The War of 1812 is an example of one, how history is not the way it was, but rather only the way people say it was. How typical history can provide a distorted, inaccurate view, either intentionally through lying distortions or unintentionally due to lack of knowledge, insight, or analytical ability, right? How the United States starts war. So without a doubt, we started this war. It's one of the many we started. How the U.S. motives for war were self-serving and expansive, as opposed to noble, self-sacrificing, and principled and defensive. Granted, Britain was screwing us by arming the Indians in the Northwest Territory, but underlying our actions, we're going to push our expansive interests, right? Finally, like I said, I have never really studied the War of 1812. I cannot tell you a single land campaign. I barely know anything about naval battles, except that the key fight was over key water transportation routes. I've never looked at a single original source document for this war, but I don't care. I still think I have a better grasp on what went on than impressment and orders in council. I mean, I think it's pretty stupid. All I did was integrate diverse information and analyze things better. Stuff I knew off the top of my head. I'm saying, right? I know historians may get personally, ego offended. Okay. Um, I'm sorry, my battery ran out, so I replaced my battery. I'm still running here. Um, so let's see. Yeah, I know historians, professional historians, teachers, whatever, right? University professors may get personally ego offended and attack this, right? But it is my opinion that typical history of the War of 1812 is crap history, right? From what I've read, right? Just using knowledge off the top of my head, integrating things that I see that, wait a minute, it wasn't that simple, right? War of 1812. All right, so again, if you can examine history, right? We said that history can be distorted, either intentionally or from just being poor history. So typical history of the War of 1812 is, I believe, crap history. I believe my analysis blows away the popular history, and I've done no real research. All right, I fully admit that. I just used my background knowledge and integrated a far broader and realistic picture of what went on. I could do the research, but I really have no interest. Right. So that's it for the my assessment of the War of 1812. The key thing is we started this war. Why? Well, it wasn't so simple as impressing sailors or obstructing trade because we've gone through